Okay, thanks for joining us, everybody. Looking forward to today. We're going to be tackling something that I think almost every organization and a lot of our managed service partners um, are dealing with right now, which is security tool sprawl. Uh, right, most businesses have invested in multiple security stacks, different products in their stack, but they just hasn't turned out to mean better protection and better cyber risk mitigation. So we're going to talk about what really works today and how to get there without starting all over, right? So let me introduce our speakers here. I'll start with Keegan Bolstad. Let him introduce himself, and then we'll kick the ball over to Jared and get this thing going.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name's Keegan with Ontech Systems, Vice President of Sales and Operations. Jared, I'll kick it over to you.
Jared Olson, security team lead, manage our security stack and our security offering for OnTech.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So, what we want to be able to do today is just share some insights, what we've seen work, what we have seen, um, how we have helped a lot of organizations achieve the type of cyber risk mitigation they're looking to be able to have for the business without starting all over, like I said. So let's start with that problem. Jared, I'll go to you first. What are you seeing out there when it comes to organizations managing their security stack either effectively or not as effectively?
Thanks, Travis. So what I would start with is most of the environments that we inherit are a result of years of additive decisions, not strategy. So our job typically starts with untangling decisions that were made by previous vendors. So most of the security stacks specifically are accumulated, they're not designed. The tools are added reactively after incidents, audits, insurance requirements. Uh, Although each tool does solve a problem, no one ever really went back to ask, is this the right control? Who owns it? How does it operate? Are we measuring it properly? So we frequently see individual tools that are strong, but very weak operational security. And that's the problem that we're here discussing today. Um, some organizations have, even though they have adequate tools, they think that that's their overall protection, and that's where it stops. So ownership is unclear, like I said earlier, about who actually monitors, who responds, who decides, who makes decisions, and then we become the MSP, for example, becomes the de facto integrator, but we don't have authority to or clarity or on the outcomes that ownership is looking for. So that's what I would summarize it as.
Yeah. Yeah. Keegan, do you have anything add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of play off Jared's point, one of the biggest challenges with security tools is more products doesn't necessarily always mean better protection. So it's really understanding how tools integrate with one another, how you can get better visibility across tools, and how you can use tools in conjunction with one another to deliver an outcome. And one of the biggest things that we see specifically right now with like tool sprawl is it's a lot of siloed tools. There's not necessarily that uniform vision that Jared talked to where it's this is that business outcome that we're looking for, and then these are how each of those tools play into that business outcome. Smaller organizations are even in a more of a starting point gap because they don't have the expertise. So when you look at like an internal IT team or person, if they don't have a heavy cyber background, they're kind of taking tools, they're inheriting things and attempting to make them work rather than actually having an expertise led solution.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think that's interesting too, that, the different types of organizations, not everybody's a little different, and you guys have a pretty large customer base and a variety in that customer base. How does that tool sprawl problem look? Is it different between a 50 FTE full-time employee organization and a 500, or are they more similar than you think in terms of the tool sprawl problem? We're going to learn how to say that by the end of this webinar.
Jared, you good if I tackle that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is we see the larger customer base, because Travis, to your point, OnTech supports customers in a varying sectors, varying industries, and then varying sizes. What we see within the smaller organizations is typically a more immature tool stack, and not necessarily as in depth of an understanding of where it's playing or why it's in the environment. When you start to get into the larger environments, we see more tools and we see more disparity in tools of, well, this is supposed to be doing this versus this tool is doing that. But there's not actual clarity on if it's actually completing that job, how is it completing it? And that's where we get into that visibility. How do we see what's happening within the tool spaces? And how do we understand who's responsible for it? So like that's an area where Ontech, as an example, when we start getting into larger and customers start talking of responsibility matrix between something of what's Ontech responsible for versus internal IT, or potentially even a partner like yourself and Cyberleaf, and how you work with us to deliver these solutions to an end customer, end organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Jared, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
I think Keegan had a lot of good points. The couple of points I would make would be that larger companies struggle with the coordination across teams and the tools that they have to support those teams. Large organizations face more operational complexity, but smaller organizations face more risk from single incidents. So that's how I would summarize that.
Yeah, that I totally agree. And one thing that, we've seen a lot when we are working with any size organization that is dealing with this tool sprawl problem is the more sprawl, the harder it gets to identify the gaps in that security posture, because you're, you're trying to put all these different pieces together to figure out where that one little gap is. What is one of the more common gaps in security posture you guys see when you're helping a customer trying to get their arms around their tool sprawl issue?
Yeah. I'd go back a little bit to that responsibility matrix and who's assigned to manage the alert, clear the alert, check the alert. There's always the dynamic of somebody else thinks somebody else is doing something. So really knowing who's responsible for that. And then I'd also say too, as you explore specifically within larger organizations, how third party or other vendors then play into that. Because at times other software providers, other parties have access to their network, whether it's known or unbeknownst to that end customer, that there's actually ways in there. So it's looking at how do we go out and ensure that they're meeting that level of security that we want for access to end customer systems.
Yeah, yeah. I think that brings up sort of an interesting, good segue there into, we kind of identified the challenge that we see a lot. So what is kind of, you know the solution, right? And as an organization that provides cybersecurity services, what does defense in depth mean to Ontech when you're working with your clients, versus layered defense, which is just a bunch of security layers in place, versus an actual defense in depth and an orchestrated security solution?
Jared, I think you should tackle that one first.
Sure. Yeah, I would say with the layers that you referred to, Travis, that's a really good example that in a more defense in depth environment, we're talking about layers that actually have a purpose and that associate that purpose to a framework. We typically like to follow NIST framework, CIS, those sorts of frameworks. But what I'm specifically talking about is the layer of prevention has to have a purpose. The layer of detection has to have a purpose, and how you respond to a particular incident. That's another factor for purpose. And then how do you recover from an incident if it does occur? And that's where I think that partnership between Ontech and Cyberleaf is a really good, purposeful defense in depth mechanism. A couple other things I would say is each layer kind of knows its role. Uh, there's no single control that carries unrealistic expectations. Um, for us, I would say the identity part is still very much at the front door. Identity is still the number one thing that needs to be protected.
Absolutely.
Even in the AI era, identity still plays a huge role in that. And being able to monitor behavior for endpoints, being able to implement network controls that slow attackers down, making sure that your backups and your incident response plans are actually there and functional and provide you with that safety net. So I would say the controls that you put in place they're practiced. They're not just installed. They're tested. They're vetted. They're simulated. They're through tabletop exercises, etc. So if you don't test something, the layer doesn't really exist.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and I think that testing and ensuring outcomes is something that we see a lot of organizations struggle with, and they need to find somebody who can help them do that. Having an outside perspective, usually will get you some more of that, you know, transparency, right? That a lot of organizations struggle with when they're trying to do those kinds of things internally. So when Ontech comes in and is helping an organization who has been trying to invest in mitigating their cyber risk. They've been buying tools. They've been taking that, you know, throw a tool at the problem kind of approach, and they realize we're just not getting the return on this investment we had hoped. You guys are coming in to help them address that. When they start making that change from a tool-based approach to the outcome-based one, what's the first thing that you see change inside that organization from either a cultural or just an executive level, Keegan?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing starts with executive buy-in, and they can buy outcomes. It's really hard when you're speaking with an executive or a non-technical person to really talk about tools and features of
Right.
tools. So executives can understand outcomes better than they can understand features and benefits. So it's really about getting that executive buy-in to understand this is where we're trying to get to, and creating roadmaps to get there. Most organizations aren't going to go from a tool-based approach to a defense in depth type approach in a 30, 60, 90-day window. It's a strategy shift. It's a change that takes time. I'd say the other big thing that we see once we start to see the outcome buy-in is typically a little bit of relief on the IT side. Because at the end of the day, that's really what IT is most concerned with is what call are they going to take in the middle of the night and have to respond to. So when we can start really talking about outcomes that get them to focus less in a reactive manner and more in a proactive manner to how they deal with security, you see their stress levels reduce. You see their demeanor change because they're now not necessarily always concerned about the what ifs, but it's more of the what do I need to do to ensure that I have this particular outcome. And those are things as we talk with customers. Jared brought up NIST, and really respond and recover in the NIST framework have become so critical. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's where having that defense inspect strategy about outcomes matters, because we know if something happens, this is the outcome that we should have from it. And that's where the last piece on this would be to Jared's point on tabletop exercises. It's about creating dialogue between IT and executives so they understand the actual outcomes or the actual situation that the business is in. A lot of executives feel that, oh, hey, I bought tools, I'm good. I don't need to worry about this. I bought this product. I bought MDR.
Yep.
I'm good. My endpoints are just protected. And it's like you're really having that dialogue of this is the actual outcome that happens in a ransomware incident. So yes, there is some layers of protection there, but we're still going to have some pain. Are we accepting of this pain? Yes or no? And then we can start to make decisions on strategy and forward approach from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know that Jared, you spend a little bit more of your time in the trenches with customers, with the IT people, or your customers that Ontech is their IT, right? So when you're working either with that smaller maybe one man IT shop, or an office manager or somebody who's kind of responsible for liaising with Ontech on the IT side, when you guys have implemented this more orchestrated cybersecurity approach, what does that change for them in their day-to-day experience, like more in the trenches, not so much at the executive level?
Yeah. So the best way for me to equate that to real life scenarios is a lot. We're dealing with less fire drills. We're dealing with a lot less alert fatigue. From an IT perspective, that is a big thing of like what do we actually need to be paying attention to? Where do we actually need to be responding to something, and to what criticality does that response need to be uh, customized for? So we really want to kind of focus and change that experience to more of a improving controls, reducing exposure. We want to be less reactive and more strategic. So that's where the day-to-day experience really changes from an IT perspective of having security more operationalized, having better integration with your tools, having better visibility, and really rich information about what's actually occurring and how to prioritize things. So what we really want to be spending more of our time on is improving your security posture, reducing your attack surface, training and developing your staff, um, and that kind of helps our team's confidence improve too, because we get clear authority, we have clear success criteria. It really helps us drop burnout because our work feels more purposeful. So that's how that day-to-day experience really changes from an IT perspective.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing there,
Go ahead.
too? I think too, one of the things that we've seen, especially in the last two maybe 3 years, is AI has really become more used. We've seen attack chains accelerate in terms of how fast they happen. And that's really what like the people in the trenches, I think, would say the most is the ability to get visibility onto what's happening and the actionability of what needs to occur has to speed up to keep pace with the bad actors. And that's one of the things that we notice when it's more of that defense in depth approach is it's not just a layering of tools and trying to understand what's alerting and happening within tools. It's that approach of we now have this visibility, we now have better ideas or understandings of a bad actor's TTP and what we need to do to resolve that or mitigate what they're attempting to accomplish in the attack chain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% on that. Is and something that my director of security operations center and CPO talks about all the time around, the AI thing is that AI is not really doing anything new in terms of like bad actors aren't really using it for anything new. They're just using it to be much faster. So the good guys got to be faster too. And when you have tools and aren't talking to each other, you might be able to have the data you need in those two different layers to move quicker. But if they're not talking to each other, you can't correlate it. You can't see that into that centralized kind of, one pane of glass or view. That's you're going to be moving slower, right? And that's speed kills and security. So, you know, when you talk to an organization that is kind of in this mode where spend a lot of money on tools and they just haven't gotten the results they wanted, they're looking more for outcomes. You know, are they concerned they're going to have to start all over? Do they need to start all over from scratch, or how have you guys helped them take what they've got and move to this more orchestrated approach?
Yeah, I mean, most people's investment in tools is a very good starting point. It's not necessarily about always ripping and replacing what they have, but it's more of how can we leverage it better or to a more full extent. And that's where I would say from uh, an MSP led or a provider led approach rather than internal is we've got access to systems and pieces that allow a little bit better connectivity. No offense to internal IT, but this is again part of the benefit of provider approaches is we deal with this every day. We see this every day. And we also see all these different tools all the time. So we're better equipped to understand this is kind of the stack. And these are just some minor tweaks that we can do, not replacing everything, but some few minor changes to get a little bit more cohesion within those tools to get those better outcomes. So it's not necessarily always just you bought this and this is bad. It's more of, hey, you purchased this is configured to go this far, but it's actually got the capability to go farther. So let's get in there. Let's get that program to go farther,
Do more.
and reach deeper. And then let's also integrate it into this identity protection tool that you've purchased too. Because then now we've taken this from just an MDR where we're trying to protect the endpoint to go after endpoint and identity all with the same tool, same platform.
Hmm.
That single panel is going to make life easier for IT, because then if they're the ones that are responsible to deal with those alerts, instead of having pieces in two dispersed systems that we need to monitor and maintain, we've now got it in one centralized place.
Right.
And so it's really about helping them not retool or change tools, but better implement their tools and better integrate their tools.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've since partnering with Ontech that I've seen is Ontech does a great job of consulting with your clients and consulting with organizations who are coming to you looking for some help, right? So Jared, how you do a lot of that, how do you help clients prioritize what to fix first? Like, hey, we don't have this, or even though we invested all these tools, or we're not using this the right way. How do you help them prioritize what to fix first versus what can wait?
That's an excellent question. So when we're talking about prioritization of risk, because that's really what it is
Mhm.
what's the likelihood that that particular risk is to be exploited or really affect the business from an operational standpoint? What's the actual business impact, and what controls are already there or can be put in place that can be the most effective at addressing that risk from eliminating it, maybe, or mitigating it, or transferring it to somebody else. So risk acceptance becomes deliberate. It's not about neglecting. It's about being able to establish where your risks are and really organizing what the likelihood of that particular impact would be to the business if that risk were to be exploited. And to me, I think progress matters more than perfection. So if you're focusing more on addressing your issues from a proactive standpoint, you don't need to be perfect, but you need to start somewhere. You need to have a strategy. So for us, we don't rank by security scores alone. We look at the likelihood, we look at the business damage, we look at the effort versus the impact. And then some risks, honestly, get accepted intentionally and documented because you might be on like Keegan referred to, a system that's older that may not be able
Sure.
to be replaced, or there's a significant investment that needs to happen. So that's what we try to do when we are talking to consulting with our clients and consulting. It's not just an IT solution; it's a business solution, and we really want to risk align everything with risk.
Yeah. And I think, helping clients understand their risk and understand their risk tolerance is really important too. It's easy to come in and scream fire, right? That's easy, but to come in and help them understand, now that I know this risk, I understand that I have to tolerate some of this risk, and I'm aware of it now. We can start putting in, plans and defense around other areas so it doesn't spread. So that risk we can mitigate it and manage it as best as possible. So what does a realistic first step look like for an organization that wants to move towards this model, Keegan?
Yeah, how we typically go about that initial engagement, um, it's kind of a combination of a gap or white space analysis mixed with a business impact analysis. So it's kind of basically laying everything out. What do we have today? Where do we have gaps? And then starting to really prioritize based on what we see in the wild. A good example, we work with customers that are small. Nobody's got an infinite budget. Nobody's the U.S. government can just start to throw money at cyber and just go and go and go. We've got to really start to look at where we have gaps and where are the biggest risk of those gaps. Um, so if we take Jared's example where we've got aging software, okay, we may not be able to tackle replacing that aging software right off the bat, but can we silo that software within the network? Can we take some mitigating action today that's not necessarily super expensive, but at least reduces the risk profile of that until we can get to a point where we can actually replace that software fully and bring it to a more current version, a more secured version. Um, so we really like the cyber defense matrix as a tool that we've seen and used. We'd give shout out and credit to those that developed that. It's not something Ontech made by any means, but that's a really simplified gap analysis tool
Right.
that can really start to help people look at tools and where they are, and very easily start to see at both a technology level and an executive level, where should we be putting investment.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can I,
Yeah.
can I add on to that, Travis?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I think Keegan, you nailed it with the identification piece, being able to identify where those top risks exist, and then walking through a real life attack scenario in a simulated environment, finding your weakest links first, picking something that's meaningful to you, like an actual threat scenario that you might come across or you might deal with. And if you can talk with your IT department, you can talk with your managed service provider. These are things that we think about all the time of just walk it end to end. How do you identify it? How do you prevent that from happening? How do you detect when something is actually occurring in that attack scenario? And then how do you respond? What do you do? Where do you start? Who's involved? Who needs to be communicated with? And then how do you recover? Does your backup system, is that quick enough for you? Is your business going to be operational quick enough to be able to support your customers and not affect your reputation? So during that process, you can identify where your responses are stalled, where authority is maybe unclear as far as who's responsible for those things. And then you fix that one path that you've tested before you move on to anything else.
Mm.
So I would say that's a really good first step.
Yeah. That's interesting. That kind of makes me, uh, if you were to put yourself in your customer's shoes, how should they be evaluating whether they're either their internal team, if they're not using a security provider like an Ontech, uh, or their internal team? How can they evaluate? Are they really delivering the results that they're hoping for? How would you do that if you were in there? See?
Is that for me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, either I'll let you
Yeah.
take it first,
Yeah.
and
I'll
then
start.
Keegan can rip on it too.
I'll start, and I think Keegan will have some really good insight to share with that as well. But leaders need to know where their risks exist, and they need to know that clearly. So your security partner needs to make sure that from a result standpoint, they're delivering that to you. They're
Mm,
talking with you on a quarterly basis at minimum about what those top risks are, where your gaps exist, and how to address them. Um, those improvements that you make, whether they're uh, administrative, like a simple policy that doesn't exist. Maybe you don't have a technology use policy. That's something that's potentially a risk because your staff may not know what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So, from an AI perspective, that's a really good example. You could implement an AI policy that clearly outlines what's approved and what's not approved from an AI perspective. So the improvements that you make should be measurable. They should be explainable and simply understood by everyone. And in a result of that is the outcomes part of it is that security should feel calmer. It should feel more control over time because you're aware. Um, so that's what I would say.
mm,
I mean, Jared, you mentioned you've obviously we've worked together for almost 10 plus years now. We've got to be able to measure the success of something. If we can't, why are we doing it? It's just an exercise at that point if we can't measure the outcome of it. Um, if I was in IT's shoes, and this is kind of where I can provide a little bit of a unique perspective sitting at both the executive level within OnTech and in also some of the deliverable side. But there needs to be accountability that goes both ways. And this is one of the things that IT really struggles with is being able to have accountability to the executive level of, hey, you didn't allow us to do this, and then this is what led to that result. I think a risk register, which I know Jared's brought up too here on the call, is a really unique way to provide accountability up to executive and down to IT or internal IT or to even a provider. Because the risk register allows technology people to go up to executive and say, we've identified this risk. Are you willing to accept this risk? If not, okay, now we need to establish a budget. What do we need to fix this risk or reduce this risk? And then they can get an approval on it. Versus if an executive level accepts that risk because they don't want to do anything, it then gives technology or provider the way to have some accountability back in the event something were to occur that, hey, we brought this up and we didn't do anything about it. And here's why we didn't do anything about it. And there's times where there's cases where it wasn't the right priority or it wasn't the time to do something about it. And it was just bad luck that something negative occurred around that particular risk. But a lot of that starts with the push-pull between the two, and then also having the ability to establish budgets for improvement, or how you go establishing budgets. One of the things that we're seeing kind of shift within Ontech is we talk with customers who want to talk more about strategy. It's more about first then beginning with what's the budget for strategy. What do we have for investment to actually dive in and create strategy?
Right.
And then secondly, what's the enforcement of policy? I think that's the other rub that we see a lot from internal IT is, hey, we made this policy, but then nobody follows it. And executives don't hold anybody accountable if they didn't follow it. Well, that creates organizational risk. That creates potential problems. So it's really, executive and policy need to be in tandem. They need to be agreed upon. Otherwise, it's just an exercise. There's no way to enforce it. There's no way to measure if it was successful.
Yeah. Jared, before we kind of start wrapping up, was there anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, I wanted to specifically call Cyberleaf out on this partnership obviously as an MSP, we have our goals and how we want to deliver results. But one thing that I think we've done with partnering with Cyberleaf is we've really matured our overall results driven security practice. So we're proactively bringing issues to clients. We're not just responding to incidents and alerts that happen. We're able to objectively show improvement over time, whether it's false positive, reducing false positives, mean time to detect, mean time to respond, mean time to recover. So what I feel like we've really done is we've built a trust within our clientele that during an incident, we're going to act, and our clients are going to trust that. That's what you want from your security partners. If they can't, and if they can't explain risk to you in plain language, they probably don't own it or really fully understand how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the folks watching this, you know, can relate to the things we've talked about, especially, um, like even just understanding, how to budget for strategy, right? That's actually a pretty progressive way of thinking of things that, um, I think is a big value that OnTech brings. You guys are doing a great job of consulting with clients and helping them understand how to get more out of that budget and that spend, and being that results driven type partner, and that you're constantly wanting to improve yourselves there, um, really brings a lot of value to your clients. When we've had a chance to interact with your clients, that's something we hear a lot. So, um, just to kind of wrap this up, any other thoughts that are worth sharing on, the tool sprawl problem, how cybersecurity is not a purchase, it's a journey. You need to be able to have that roadmap. You need to be able to have that partner that you can lean on that's going to help you identify your existing risk and new risks as they come up. If there was any final takeaway that you guys would want to share with the thousands watching today, what would that be? Any last parting thoughts before we kind of wrap up, and then I'll let you guys share how clients can engage with you guys to do this kind of thing. Keegan, you want to go first?
Sure. I guess one closing thought would be a lot of organizations that we talk to, no matter the size, kind of always view that they're too small. I'm not going to experience anything. Nobody's after me. And the harsh truth is that sentiment isn't fully inaccurate. It's very rare that some of these threat actors or these groups are waking up tomorrow saying, we're going to go after this little old business in Wisconsin. But your data is valuable. Your intellectual property, the things you hold, have value. And they're after monetary gain. And these threat actors don't care if the company's small or big. They're after money, and they're after easy money. So the more that you look at it, it's not a matter of you're too small for them. You're too small for a super sophisticated targeted attack, but you're not too small for wide net cast and wide net targeting that all these threat groups do. So it's not that somebody's waking up with the intention to hack your specific business tomorrow, but I guarantee you somebody will take advantage of your business in the event that they are given an easy chance to do so.
Jared, did any parting thoughts before we wrap up with how clients can engage with Ontech?
Yeah, I think having to start somewhere, having a strategy of some kind. I've always heard that bad plan is better than no plan. So even if you don't really know what that future plan looks like, you should
Right.
start somewhere. One of the things you can do is you can perform a security assessment. You can get a roadmap conversation started with your partner of really how are we going to tackle these priorities. What budget dollars do we need to be able to address these gaps and vulnerabilities? Where can we maybe integrate some of the tools that we currently have that are doing a good job, but maybe aren't giving that rich data that we need to be able to provide in the forefront? And then, potentially having a managed services engagement regarding security if you don't currently have that. That's where the evolution of the MSP world is really matured to is managed security and really providing that strategy. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think sometimes going down that path of approaching, you know, the strategy, the risk, those things can be a little intimidating. I think that's where um, building trust with a partner like Ontech um, really makes a big difference for a lot of folks, right? So, who should be thinking about engaging with Ontech, and what's the best way for those different types of organizations to work with you guys and see how you might be able to help them with these issues?
I'll leave that to
Yes.
Keegan. That's Keegan.
That's my wheelhouse. No, Ontech's got we've got both of free assessment services. So for those that are really in that infancy stage and just kind of wanting to collect some information or understand at a very simplified base level where they're at, feel free to contact us at sales@ontech.com. That email will get a ticket over on our side, and we'll kind of reach out and go from there on a free kind of engagement. Um, we'll typically do an attack surface map, a little bit of an Active Directory audit. We'll give you some nuggets that you can use to move forward. Otherwise, for paid engagements, whether that's pen testing, vulnerability scanning, all those types of pieces, same thing. Just hit us up at sales@ontech.com, and we'll be in touch to kind of work on scoping and quoting that out for you.
Awesome.
Hey, Travis, did you want to also talk about where we can kind of work together with customers that have CMMC compliance or ITAR requirements? Can you talk a little bit about that end and how we've engaged Cyberleaf's assistance and what you guys offer on that end?
Sure. Yeah. No. Thanks for teeing that up there. Yeah. So we are CMMC L2 RPO. We provide both professional services for organizations that are trying to tackle the CMMC challenge right now. If you are in the defense space, even as a third party in the supply chain, the big four are rolling this down to everybody, saying like, even though you're not necessarily selling on a contract, we use you, so you need to be CMMC at least L1, and that seems like a really daunting task. So for a lot of organizations, so what we have built a practice around being able to simplify that and really dig into what's required, what's not required, where are the gaps now, and then also be able to provide some of those CMMC ongoing managed security services like 24/7 monitoring and things like that through a CMMC L2 certified SOC. So security operations center. So and not just CMMC, but we're very familiar with all the compliances out there, and how organizations can start using those as a framework to start building around. I think a lot of times when it comes to making that plan and making that strategy, that's something that we see a lot that people could be doing a better job of, because they haven't really been able to get you know get that going yet. So we want to be able to help them use a framework that no matter what happens in the future, they've got something to continue to build around, right? So, we are able to go and help customers in Wisconsin um, with those different compliance issues, with the managed security services through Ontech, and if they are worried that CMMC might become a problem for them, might become an issue for them, now's the time to talk about that. Right, now's the time to reach out, contact sales@ontech.com and ask to consult with us on that so that we can let them know uh, how big of a deal this is going to be for their business. One of the things that is really a major thing around CMMC is it's directly tied to revenue. If you have to be CMMC compliant, you're not, you lose that business, right? And we have talked to customers who that business was not significant enough for them to make the massive changes to the organization, and so they decided to take a small loss, but we helped them make that decision. We helped them understand what the cost was going to be, what the actual lift was going to be around that, and what was the ROI of doing either way, right? We weren't there to just sell them CMMC services. We really were there to help them understand, where to go next, because we do believe in building trust, and that, doing good while doing well, right? That's a big part of kind of what our culture is. So if that's something that, we can help with, we'd love to talk to you more, talk to folks about that more.
Yeah, Travis, funny you mentioned that. We just talked on a recent engagement where 90% of the business's revenue was tied to DoD contracts.
Right.
So right there, that's 90% of your business out the window if you don't maintain that and if you don't make the improvements that are required. So thank you.
Yeah.
Glad you were able to talk about those
Yeah. And
services as
I
well.
think, one thing we see a lot too, just, kind of wrapping up on that, this CMMC thing has been going on for a long time. The government's been changing deadlines and kicking the can down the road a lot. And so people have kind of gotten the process started, and then they paused, and now they're like picking it back up from where they started, and sometimes from before where they started. And it's hard for a lot of organizations to find somebody they can work with, and that, they can afford, right? So we have built programs around CMMC road mapping and things like that, where they don't have to pay $150,000 up front just to get the consultation. We can build it into a program where they can turn it into more of a managed CMMC service with that consultation. So don't let that be, kind of the barrier to understanding how CMMC might affect your business. If anyone has questions, feel free to reply to the email that you received with the link to the webinar, and we'll have someone get right back to you with some answers there and connect with you. So guys, I really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to doing this again some time down the road. And thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks for having us.